Historically, I wouldn't say that my taste in video games has been diverse. Until relatively recently, it's been almost exclusively Destiny. And I've got a little more time in that game than I like to admit. However, around a year and a half ago, I purchased a bundle of 10 minimalist puzzle games, which swiftly took over my life. If you haven't heard of the genre before, minimalist puzzle games are exactly what they sound like. Puzzle games with a minimalist aesthetic to them. They usually consist of lines and shapes as their core mechanics, and put an emphasis on introducing and teaching mechanics in a simple, procedural way before moving on to more complicated puzzles. These 10 games opened my eyes to a new genre that I didn't even know I would love so much. So today, I'm going to talk about every single one of them and hopefully spark your interest in the genre, because I highly recommend giving them a shot. Admittedly though, it has been almost a year since I've touched any of these games, so I spent an entire day playing through all 10 of them. And here's what I found. We start off with Clocky, which is actually the game that inspired this video. When I was in college, I took a few game design courses, and this is one of the games that we studied when we were talking about mechanics. Specifically, we talked about how Clocky teaches players mechanics in a very procedural fashion. Typically, a mechanic is introduced with an easy to understand level. Understanding of this mechanic is slowly built up from level to level until mechanics are combined with one another, and difficulty slowly escalates. Helping your players learn along the way is an important part of all of these games. All things considered, Clocky is pretty simple. The main mechanic consists of connecting line segments to one another in order to create longer segments. Once all segments are complete, you move on to the next level. Initially, everything exists on one plane and you can swap line segments with each other freely. As we move on to later levels, however, things become more complicated. Certain line pieces become fixed, segments can rotate, and we move to additional axes, among other changes. If you ask me, this game is damn near perfect. Clocky perfects that procedural style of teaching, following it to a T, and I don't mean this in that the game completes itself for you. What I mean is that Clocky does a good job of helping players understand why mechanics act and interact with one another in the ways that they do. In this instance, through the game's teachings, you'll begin to pick up on patterns and use that to your advantage to solve puzzles. Clocky is incredibly fun, even if it's maybe not the longest game out there. This is definitely the one that I would recommend for beginners if you're just starting to get into puzzle games. Clocky's for you. Next up is Naoki. The objective of this game is to extract 3D blocks and shapes from each other. Your main mechanic is this arrow which is present on each block. Clicking on it will cause the block, and in some cases other blocks, to move in the direction of that arrow to free it. While you start off with solely cubes, you'll quickly move up to abstract shapes and blocks, which entangle themselves with other blocks. You'll have access to levers that can move obstructions in and out of the way, and certain blocks change what way their arrow faces. There's something satisfying about watching a big block or collection of small blocks fly off when you clear them correctly, which adds to the aesthetic value of the game. Naoki feels as though it has its own identity, and even its more mundane levels are enjoyable for the most part. Now, let's stick with that term for a moment. Mundane. Up Left Out is our next game, and it's one of 3 games in this list that I hadn't finished prior to making this video. And there's a reason for that. Like our predecessors, the main mechanic for this game is simple. Each block must be moved in a certain direction, or directions in some cases, to cleanse it. Once cleansed, blocks may move freely wherever there is space. The goal is to cleanse all blocks in any given level. Here's the thing. If your core mechanic is bad, you're gonna have a lot of trouble keeping players engaged with your game. In the case of Up Left Out, I found this mechanic becoming repetitive really quick. Mechanics are iterated on, with the addition of dividers the player can turn on and off, a button that rotates every single block in the space, and larger blocks with more complicated paths, but the root of the issue is still present. The core mechanic is slow and monotonous. I wish I could give it higher praise, but I don't feel like that's justified. So, when you were a kid, did you ever have one of those toys where you've got all the blocks and the shapes, and the square goes in the square hole, and the circle goes in the circle hole, and so on and so forth? That's Scalac, but way cooler. Scalac is sort of like a 3D jigsaw puzzle where perspective is the name of the game. And if that doesn't sound cool, I don't know what does. I mean, just look at the variety of shapes this game offers. All of these pieces you need to find space for are just so irregular and wacky, and it gives the game a really nice touch. Of course, the game is in a 3D space, as we mentioned, giving a whole new form of depth to all of these pieces. At a certain point, however, the game just like changes on you. I'm not kidding, we move into brand new mechanics. The core loop of filling holes with proper things is still intact, but we move into brand new shapes and systems. The fact that Scalac pulls such a direct 180 like this blows my mind. On top of that, the game looks super vibrant and lively due to the choice of colors, which I love. It's got a real happy vibe to it. Anyway, Scalac is awesome. Like I said, it's sort of a 3D jigsaw puzzle when you think about it, which is pretty cool. Up next is Zenge. This one definitely veers more on the casual, chill side. It's still really fun, so let's talk about it. I know I just referred to Scalac like a jigsaw, but Zenge dials that to 11. In Zenge, your puzzle pieces are stuck moving along designated paths. It's your job to get all the pieces into their proper slots without hitting any other pieces along the way. Now, on paper that might not sound too special, but stay with me. There are two things that really come together to make Zenge an awesome experience. Firstly are the side mechanics. Beyond just translating pieces along our axes, certain levels have the ability to reflect pieces horizontally and vertically, transport pieces to different spots of the map entirely, and even merge pieces into one another. Secondly, Zenge's art direction is off the chain. After completing a puzzle, you get to see your finished picture, each of which continues a subtle narrative for the game. I can't say I've pieced this narrative together for myself, but all the artwork is stunning and vibrant. This game's music is also surprisingly on point. Prior to now, we've had very subtle ambient music in all of our games, but this track feels more fleshed out and fitting with all the finished puzzles we see after each level. So while it's probably not my favorite game on this list, Zenge scores a ton of points for presentation and delivery. Art of Gravity is the next game on the list. This is another one that I haven't finished, and it's definitely the game I've played the least. I mean, prior to this video, I had literally 3 minutes of playtime, so this is going to be a learning experience for all of us. Each level in Art of Gravity has a set of items that must be broken. We do this by throwing a ball in its general direction. That's about it. I don't know, I wish I had more to say about this game, but I left just kind of feeling indifferent. Visually, I think it's super impressive, especially when you're watching all the blocks crumble so fluidly. Beyond that, though, nothing really wowed me, which is a shame. Following Art of Gravity, however, is a solid game called Oxo. The goal of Oxo is to connect matching shape tiles to one another while making sure they don't touch any mismatching shape tiles. This sounds easy enough, but don't let the shapes fool you. If I had to pick a hardest game on this list, I think it would be Oxo. Mechanics are taught procedurally, as they have been for all of our games, but we ramp up into harder levels and more difficult mechanics quite fast. Personally, I love that Oxo brings a more formidable challenge than some of the other entries on this list. I usually find more difficult puzzles to be a lot more fulfilling to solve. If that's not your jam though, I totally get it. This game is not for the faint of heart, if we're looking at it from a beginner's perspective. Like Scalac, Oxo also uses some really vibrant colors, which I adore. It's got creative mechanics and provides a real challenge, so it's pretty good in my books. With that, we are on to Push. And I don't really like this game. Now, don't take that as me telling you not to try it or devaluing the experiences that you have with the game. I'm sure there's an army of Push supporters out there that are ready to die for the game, but for me, it just didn't really make me feel that much. Let's go back to Up Left Out for a moment. Remember that if your core mechanic is boring, there's only so much you can do to improve the rest of your game. In the case of Push, this has never been more evident to me. The core mechanic of this game is pushing buttons in a proper sequence. This changes on a level-to-level basis. Sometimes you need to ensure that you select buttons in an ascending order, sometimes it's descending, sometimes it's back and forth between colors. So far, nothing offensive. What draws me away from Push, however, is what I'm going to call the mistake factor. In these games, there's very little risk. If you make a mistake, it can usually be undone by simply reversing whatever you did. In Naoki, for instance, if you accidentally obstruct your block, all you need to do is flick a lever to get right back to where you just were a few seconds ago. With Push, a single wrong button press can take you right back to the start of the level, which feels incredibly frustrating and makes the final clear of the level less rewarding. I felt like I was being assigned a chore to open up this game, which isn't a good feeling. So it's a miss for me, but if you enjoy this game, power to you. Alright, so Push was pretty rough, but thankfully, we're talking about Hook now. And when I tell you I love this game, believe me, because I love this game. At its core, Hook is simple. Each level has a set of buttons, each of which send a signal down a wire to a line. Your goal is to send signals to safe lines, which will retract them, while ensuring they don't collide with other lines. While Hook is a simple game, there's a little bit of elegance behind it too. While the earlier levels are relaxed and laid back, late levels make you feel like you're defusing a bomb. These levels get so tense because you have lives on each level. If you allow lines to collide into one another, you'll lose a life. Losing all of your lives will reset the level entirely. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dalton, you just criticized Push for punishing mistakes. Why is it better in Hook? And first of all, shut up, smartass. Secondly though, it's because we learn in Hook. When I make a mistake in Hook, it at least leaves me feeling like I learned something, which I can use to find success on my next attempt at the level. When I make a mistake in Push, I feel like I haven't learned much, and that I'm being sent back to square one because my finger slipped and hit the wrong button. Enough about mistakes though. This game has some simple iterations to its mechanics, including points that cause a button signal to split and hit multiple lines at once, and wireless signals that let you hit lines without being directly connected to them. For a game made up of a bunch of lines, Hook is surprisingly in-depth. Also, Hook has exactly 69 levels, so I just thought I would mention that nice detail. And finally, we've reached our last game. And it's the game so nice, they knighted it twice. That's right, there's a sequel. We're talking about Hook 2. Hook 2. Mechanically, Hook 2 doesn't change that much. It's the same old Hook gameplay that you know and love, with one key difference. Yeah, my mind was blown too. The 3D aspect, while cool, does tend to be a double-edged sword sometimes. For the most part, it's used super tastefully and gives Hook 2 its own identity from the first game. However, when you start to get levels like this, where you can't tell what's connected to what without an electron microscope, yeah, you start to lose me. As another small note, I do like that they updated their line textures to be more clear about what overlaps with what. That got a little overwhelming in the first game, so it's nice to see a change here. I really don't have much to say about Hook 2 by virtue of it being practically the same game as Hook 1, but yeah, it is pretty damn good. So, now that we've talked about all 10 games, let's rank them. Number 10, Push. Yeah, you guys probably knew that this was coming. The only thing that this game left me desiring was a different game. Maybe in another universe we could be friends, but not this one. Number 9, Up, Left, Out. Small, immovable objects in a tiny space ain't doing it for me. If that's your fancy, power to you. I'm gonna play something else though. Number 8, Art of Gravity. Of the games I hadn't played or finished before this video, this was probably my favorite. That said, I can't say it changed my outlook on life. Great visuals, not much else to say. Number 7, Zenge. We're officially out of bad game territory, and now I feel like I'm just ranking my children because I really love the rest of the games on this list. While Zenge doesn't have my favorite mechanics of all time, it's simple and beautiful, so I can't really knock it that much. Number 6, Oxo. Oxo's great. I love the difficulty. I love the colors. I really just don't have much to say. I just like this game. Number 5, Naoki. Putting this one lower feels like a crime, but whatever. Naoki's mechanics feel engaging, messing around with the cubes is fun, and it's colorful. Next, number 4, Scalac. Scalac and Naoki are essentially interchangeable on the ranks. I think these two are about on the same level, but right now I'm feeling this one. Scalac's unique shapes really give it an edge for me. Number 3, Hook 2. Incredibly solid game, and works well as a sequel. It would be a little higher, but you start to lose me at the end with the jumbles of lines and wires and buttons in the last few levels, but it's still good. Number 2, Clocky. Call me biased if you want, but I have to give this game some credit for getting me into the genre in the first place. It's simple, but not in a bad way, more of like a sparking interest kind of way. And number 1, Hook. Of all 10 of these games, none have kept me as engaged and hooked as Hook did. The fact that a game can do so much with just a few lines in each level is hard to wrap my head around. It's impressive. If you're interested in playing any of these games, I'm going to leave them linked in the description. I'm not sponsored. I just have a huge love for these games, and also, I feel like it's worth mentioning, they're cheap. There's a really low point of entry. I do also want to give a shout out to the devs that made these games. Each of these was made with 1 or 2 people. And that's it. And coming off of taking game design courses and knowing how difficult that is, that's super impressive. So huge shout out to them for all the work they've done, and huge thanks to you for watching this video.